Okay. Show me.
My BFF Nearly Led Me to My Death by Ellen Wayne, 23. For some context, I've been friends with my friend, let's call him Leo, since diapers. Our families have known each other since they were in high school, and therefore Leo and I grew close. Unfortunately, Leo's parents died when he was 5, and he had to move to Montana with his grandpa Tom. It's not his real name, but everyone at the reservation calls him that. Ever since then, I try to visit him whenever I can, and sometimes he comes to visit me. The year that I went to visit him, everything was chill for the first 3 days. We played video games, went to town, and generally just hung around. Now, something that should be noted is that Grandpa Tom always told us to never go into the forest near their house during the nighttime. Whenever we asked why, he would simply reply that it would be dangerous to do so because we could get lost or attacked by an animal. I knew that what Grandpa Tom said was probably true, but someone from town had told me that those woods were said to be haunted because years ago, a witch had sacrificed 3 people in the name of Satan and then committed suicide after the town people hung her son as an act of revenge. It said that if you go far enough into the forest, you can find a giant pentagram on a stone altar, and that if you get close enough, you could potentially be cursed. It was on the 4th night, and I was incredibly bored, so Leo and I decided to play Truth or Dare. It was all going well until he dared me to go into the woods with him. I decided to go because, after all, I really love exploring potentially haunted sites, and so together we snuck out of the house. The walk towards the forest was pretty normal until we went farther in, and we sensed someone was watching us. I also felt an immense sense of danger, anger, and evil. I grabbed Leo's arm and said, "Leo, we have to get out of here. It doesn't feel safe to go any further." He simply replied with, "Oh, are you scared?" Something seemed off about Leo, though. His expression was blank. I usually don't scare easily because I've experienced paranormal stuff my whole life. But something was off about my best friend. It was almost as if he was possessed. I let go of his arm, and as I was about to pull out my phone to call Grandpa Tom for help, Leo grabbed my arm with such an immense force and looked me in the eyes and said, "That won't work. No one can help you now." Then he started laughing like a maniac, and I struggled to get away from his tight grip. I was so scared, and so I did what my mom always told me to do if someone tried to kidnap me. I kicked him in the nuts. That startled him enough for him to loosen his grip, and I was able to break free and run back towards Grandpa Tom's house. As I was running, I heard Leo yelling profanities, and suddenly he started running behind me. He seemed to be running with an inhuman speed, and in a blink of an eye he appeared in front of me, which seemed next to impossible. I was tired, but I was not about to let myself be killed in those wretched woods. I ran back towards where we had been when he attacked me, and as I looked back, he just stood there smiling. Something was really off, but I kept running until I came across an altar with a pentagram on it. I thought this had to be the infamous altar where the witch had done her sacrifices. That place radiated extreme evil, and I wanted to get out of there. I wanted to help my friend. I just wanted to go back to the safety of home. I was so tired that I fell on my knees and started crying, when all of a sudden I got an immense headache and nauseating feeling. There was a lady walking towards me. She seemed nice and innocent, but I knew better because she was emanating this evil and there was a smell of rotting flesh. I knew I had to get out of there, but I seemed frozen in place. I did the only thing I could think of, which was pray. I'm an atheist, but I didn't know what else to do. I prayed and prayed for everything to be okay. I opened my eyes to see that she was right there standing looking at me while she held an unconscious Leo in her grip. I looked right back at her and prayed out loud. To this day, I don't know why, but I started praying in Latin and then in Italian. I know these languages. It was just weird. The more I prayed, the angrier she got. And the angrier she got, the louder I prayed. Suddenly, a gunshot rang out of nowhere. The witch turned around, startled, but I just resumed my praying. She turned to look back at me, and with the raspiest voice ever, she said, "I just wanted more souls for my collection. I guess I'll have to claim other ones. Either way, your soul seems to belong to someone else." I got chills all over when she said that. She dropped Leo and slowly disappeared into the night. I ran towards his unconscious body and tried waking him up. He wouldn't wake up, and I cried and screamed his name, but it was no use. I thought he was dead. I cradled my best friend while I cried and sobbed, and I thought I would die too because it was getting extremely cold. All of my hope was lost when, by some miracle, I heard Grandpa Tom yelling our names. I yelled back and he ran towards us. The rest of the night went by like a breeze. Grandpa Tom took us to the hospital, and thankfully Leo was fine. You may all not believe me, but I swear I will never go back to those woods again. Manhunt game, submitted by Universal Jazz. Growing up in the 80s and early 90s, we had a cool neighborhood and played a lot of games with all the kids who lived there. We had the normal pickup games of baseball and football and hotbox before the bus came to pick us up in the morning, but the nighttime games were always way more fun. Stuff like hide and seek, capture the flag, and what we always just referred to as Army. We also played a game called Manhunt, which I'm sure a lot of people are familiar with. It's kind of like reverse hide and seek, where one person hides and everyone else has to look for him or her. Super fun, as we would get into teams of 2 or 3 and then spend time running around in between houses of their neighborhood looking for the fugitive and hiding. We were always coming up with new and cool ways to hide, but there were basic rules like you couldn't go inside a garage or a house or a shed. Wherever you did hide, it had to be semi-out in the open. We had a creek that ran around our neighborhood, and that was a border. You couldn't hide on the other side of that. There were woods between the neighborhood and the creek, so a lot of times that's where people hid. Coming up with new places to hide was always a challenge after you've played it so many times, but it was never a boring time when we were playing Manhunt. The time that I'm about to tell you happened in the fall, a couple of weeks before Halloween. I lived in the Northeast, so the sun goes down fairly early at that time of the year, and it does get a little cooler out. Certainly not the freezing of winter, but that time of year when everyone is wearing sweatshirts and stuff when we played outside. It was a Saturday night, and a bunch of us in our early teens decided to get together and play some Manhunt before going to one guy's house, my friend John's, to watch a movie and have popcorn. I will say right now that our neighborhood was fairly tight-knit. Everyone knew each other, and if families weren't good friends, we all certainly knew everyone on a first-name basis. This is long before the 24-hour news cycle of the terrors of what happens when kids play alone outside. Back then it was basically, tell us where you're going, stick around the neighborhood, and if you hear us calling, get your ass home. Everyone also had their own method of calling the kids home. My dad had a very powerful whistle, some families had air horns, other dads would just yell. At any rate, we all met in my backyard around 7 o'clock to start the first of the manhunts. My buddy Rick was chosen, and he was never a good manhunter player. He always wanted to be the hunted, but he sucked at it, and we always found him within a short amount of time. I will say this, our version of Manhunter might not be the same as what anyone listening might have played. The hunted could move around if someone yelled out, "Fugitive!" That allowed them to continue the game and made for more fun for everyone rather than just someone hiding in the bushes. But like I said, and I'm saying this because I know he'll listen to this, Rick sucked. One team found him right away, and we had to change up who the man to be hunted was. I teamed up with my other friend Casey, and there were 3 other teams of 2, with the odd man out being the man hunted. After Rick's flaming debacle, my friend Jordan was going to be on the run. So we gave him his 5 minutes, and then all the teams started to fan out to look for him. Casey and I took off towards the woods near the creek, and I figured Jordan was going to find a new spot there. He, like the rest of us, loved to play the game, but also liked to keep things fresh. Some guys had their go-to spots, which kind of made the game boring. We were all wearing camouflage or dark clothing except for a couple of people. And on this particular night, Jordan was wearing a dark blue or black hoodie. I think the only thing white on it was an Adidas logo, and that caused some trouble for me. Jordan had hid pretty well, and it was about 15 minutes into the game, and no one had found him yet. We bumped into the other teams and they still hadn't a clue where he was. One of the teams went back into the housing part of the neighborhood, while Casey and I and the other team stayed in the woods and along the bed of the creek. Still, we couldn't find Jordan. He was whipping our ass at this point, and Casey and I decided to split up to maximize our hunting efforts, but stayed within earshot. I was creeping along the bed of the creek with the moonlight shining off the creek when I glimpsed someone behind a big rock that I knew had to be Jordan. Dark sweatshirt, new spot, had to be Jordan. Part of the rules were you had to stay in place until someone spotted you, and I was beginning to think, though, that Jordan was breaking the rules by moving around on us. I would be so happy if I could catch him. I didn't say anything as I got nearer to the figure, and my thoughts were correct. As I got closer, the dark shape got up and started to move towards the woods. I kept along, being as quiet as I could, just following, and again, not yelling out or anything. I was going to prove that Jordan was a cheater. I didn't hear anyone else around. I just kept following the dark figure as it walked through the trails of the woods, then came up to a clearing before a bridge that separated our neighborhood from another neighborhood in town. It was a big bridge with a big road that had lights all the way across it. Basically it split the village where I grew up. Going on the other side of the bridge was certainly way out of bounds, but that's where Jordan was heading. I was so psyched I was going to bust him, but wanted to do it under the lights of the bridge so everyone who was playing would know he was a cheater. I stopped and whispered for Casey, but didn't hear anything back, and when I looked back at the edge of the woods, I realized that no one else was over where we were. I just kept following Jordan to another pile of boulders right before the bridge, but I noticed he had been speeding up, so I had to pick up the pace to catch him. When I got to the big boulders, I knew he was hiding somewhere amongst them, and finally yelled out, "Hey, asshole, you're done cheating." From behind me I heard something, but before I could turn around, a forearm got me in a headlock and started to pull me towards the bridge. I quickly realized this was not Jordan. This was someone much bigger and stronger than me. I was trying to yell and fight back, because I knew this person dragging me underneath the bridge was just taking me farther away from my friends. The farther I was dragged away, the less anyone would be apt to hear or see something wrong. The guy never said anything, except one time he said, "Shut up, kid," as he pulled me along underneath the bridge towards the other side. When we got there, thankfully, there was a group of older kids drinking beer at the edge of the bridge. These were the kids that we all called the dirtbags, but looking back, they were just the same as everyone else. Funny how guys who did that stuff were looked down upon as the bad kids, but when we all played sports and did the same thing, we were studs. When they saw me getting dragged along, I saw all of them stand up with their beer cans, and one guy in a very harsh voice said, "What the hell do you think you're doing?" He wasn't speaking to me, he was speaking to the guy, who then stopped dragging me and let go of his headlock a little bit. I was beyond terrified at that point, despite being 13 years old. I had no idea who this guy was or what he was thinking, but he certainly had bad intentions if he was dragging me along as far as he did. I heard the guy start saying something about me being his little brother, and he was trying to get me home because I was late. But then I recognized one of the guys in the gang as a dude who lived in my neighborhood that we all liked, despite our parents saying he was a bad kid. His name was Eric, and he had long black hair, listened to heavy metal, and had a really beat-up Camaro that we all thought was awesome. He recognized me right away and said, "I don't fucking think so, dude," and all the guys, all four of them, started to come over to us. The guy tightened his grip on my neck for a second, and then he threw me to the side and I fell into the creek. The guy made a run for it and got past Eric and his friends, but when he got into the light from the other side of the bridge, he turned to look at us, and the hood that he had on his sweatshirt pulled back, and it was a guy I would say was maybe in his 30s, thinning hair. He had a weird pinched face, and I remember he had some teeth missing. He ran like the wind away from us after Eric and his friends chased him for a bit, after coming back to me to make sure I was okay. I was fine, other than just being scared and soaking wet. Eric told me to get on home and to not worry about the guy. He offered me a beer, but I was only 13 and I didn't think it was a good idea at the time. I thanked him and his friends and started hauling my butt back to my friends. When I got to them, I told them what happened, and they told me Jordan had been cheating, but no one had cared at that point after they heard my story. We all went back to my friend's house for the movie, and I told his dad what happened. He immediately called my dad and made me tell him what happened, and my dad said I had to go home. I thought he was mad at me at first, but when I got there, we called the police to let them know what happened. He was happy I was safe. The police were already ahead of us. Apparently, the guy had been called on for peeping into the windows of another house while we were playing, and then he did it again in another neighborhood on the other side of the bridge after he let go of me. They picked him up, and from what I learned over the next couple of days, he was a guy who lived in the town over from us who was considered one of those weird guys. That's what we called them back then, but today we just call them out for the pedophiles that they are. I have no idea what happened to him after that, but we were all scared as kids for a little bit to be running around in the dark. Despite the fact that we knew he had been arrested, the specter of a guy like that hanging out where kids were playing was pretty spooky. Eventually we got back to playing Manhunt and all of our other games, but there was always an element of horror whenever we went out at night. Our parents changed rules for us for a little bit, but things went back to normal not very long after. Sometimes when I go back to visit my parents who still live in that neighborhood, I'll go for a walk down by the creek at night and kind of relive that scary time. It sounds kind of lame as I write this down and send it to you, but as an adult, it really hits home how creepy some people are, how danger really can be lurking around every corner, and how I was super lucky that Eric and his buddies were there to put a stop to something that probably would have ended up very bad for me. When my kids were growing up, I let them do their thing too. And I hate when people say things are so much different now, because they're not. The same predators were out there when I was a kid as they were in the 70s, the 60s, the 50s, and all the way back. We just hear so much more about them now. Always be safe is what I preach to my kids, and I advise the adults of kids today to do the same.